name, Stuart. John Jones, director. Daniel Mays, Samuel Pepys. Editor Weeks, Elizabeth. Tom Bradbury is the writer. Charles Dance, Lord Denton. Gina Cronk, producer. And Lucy Bedford, one of the executive producers on behalf of Ecos Films. Douglas Ray is also in the audience. So we'd appreciate it if you'd say who you are as you ask the question, please, because we'd like to know who we're speaking to, if that's all right. So who would like to go first? Any takers? Ian, go for it. Do you want a microphone then, Ruth? Yep.
Hi. Tom?
Yes.
Yes, Ian Wiley, freelance. Tom, what were your sort of general aims and principles in writing this, and what sort of things did you also want to avoid the pitfalls of writing a full part about Great Fire?
Well, my main aim was to write a damn good story, actually. So it's up to you whether we managed that, but the most difficult thing, in a sense, turned out to be the sort of technical job of writing. Often when you're writing something, you're looking around at where you can draw inspiration from. And I think one of the things I really give credit to ITV in this is that it was a genuinely felt like a brave commission, quite original. It's not easy to see what you obviously compare this to. So my sort of question was to myself and to everyone else in the team was: is it a thriller? Is it a relationship drama? Is it a disaster movie? Which of those things is it really? And I kept on concluding, well, actually, it's got to be all three of those things, and therefore keeping it moving and weaving it seamlessly together was actually quite a complex thing to achieve. And yeah, all these things are team efforts. We have a big team, there are plenty of others who aren't here. And everyone was brilliant at helping me do that, and as I said, it was a team effort. So that, I think, it could have felt very episodic. I worked out very early on too much fire was going to be quite tedious. Once you've seen one person escape from the house, that's quite dramatic and brilliantly done by the team. But if the whole 4 hours had been people escaping from houses, it would have got pretty tedious. So I was trying to find different things, like there's a sort of, when they're crushed in the street scene, having been quite often in my career in crowds, it's very, very frightening to be stuck in a crowd in those kind of circumstances. So I was looking for different ways of keeping the story moving and then weaving it all together. I think the danger would have been that it felt very episodic and disjointed, and I think if it does work okay, the significant biggest achievement was weaving it all together and weaving the political thriller into the disaster movie, into the relationship drama. At the end of the day, it comes down to the actors and the direction, and I just thought we had a brilliant cast, and there wasn't a minute watching that when I just didn't feel kind of that the story was moving forward in an interesting way. So at the end of the day, thanks to the team for actually making it work.
Gina and John, you received Tom's scripts then. Where did you take it from there? What's your first thoughts when you received the scripts? It would be quite good to emphasise the kind of team effort, if that's okay.
If I go first, in there, and talk about the logistics, I think.
Perfect.
There are many things that are quite easy to write, but actually quite hard to achieve. And Peter Finch mentioned in his introduction that it hasn't been done. And I think we figured out quite quickly the reason is it's really hard to set fire to something over and over and over again, and to build in the process by which you can set fire to a building, turn it off, start again, turn it off, start again, go over the close-ups. And that aspect of the script, although it's not, as Tom's just said, it's not all of it, that took quite a lot of working out and quite a lot of planning, and the team were brilliant at that. So my initial concern, my predominant concern when reading and receiving all the drafts that Tom did at all the episodes was, how are we going to do this?
We're not going to be shooting
How
that.
are we going to do it? Are we? Really? Oh, and then on the Thames, do they now? On a barge? Okay. Right, with sheep. Good. So then we hired John.
And then you created the vision, John.
Well, no. I mean, there's a huge team involved in something like this. I think, if I'm honest, when you receive the script, you don't really think how are you going to do that per se, because what you have to focus on, what Tom I think was trying to do, which is you know, we are surrounded by some quite hard politics at the moment, harsh things that are happening around us, and so what you try and get to is who are you going to get to inhabit these characters, because ultimately, you know, the story is about a family trying to survive amongst, you know, these terrible events, but also the terrible politics that surround these events. And I think you then go to the actors, and the actors kind of do that for you. And the logistics, I suppose, is, you know, it's a great pleasure working in this industry, because we do get to do an awful lot of craft. But really, you know, it's Gina and I and the designers and whatever sitting down and going, okay, so how do we do this? Where do we build it? You know, etc., etc., which is a job of work in a way. But I think the central thing that comes down to it is just trying to put, you know, those actors in positions where we can tell the story ultimately. And, you know, we could have spent much more money, much less money, or whatever. But in a sense, that's irrelevant, because what it comes down to is these people telling that story day by day, I suppose. And that's what ultimately that you have to focus on a daily basis, is what they're doing, you know, telling the story.
I think it is worth saying that there are a couple of scenes that didn't make it. I wrote this scene about the king and his brother's defence of the Fleet Ditch. It was a fantastic scene. Gina said you can get Peter Finch to lob in another 10 million, we can even make it. But it didn't actually add anything. And I think one of the things John and the team were really brilliant at was not losing, you know, we had a great group of actors. And I think everyone was very keen to just make sure that we concentrated wherever possible on the human drama and didn't burn 10 million for no particular reason.
Okay, go for it.
Adam Sherwin from The Independent. Tom, Peter mentioned at the beginning contemporary resonances in the story. You've got the advisors trying to tell the king he's spending too much money, reference to an incompetent mayor, trying to find someone to blame when there's a major disaster. From your experience in the lobby, did you bring some of those contemporary resonances to bear on the way you wrote the story?
God, he's going to be careful how I answer this question. I prefer being on that side of the divide, by the way. I think the thing actually just watching just then is, I suppose I was reminded, you know, so much of it, I suppose I did draw on my own experiences, you know, frightening nature of being in a riot or being trapped in a street, what it's like sort of witnessing families who've lost everything in an earthquake or, you know, a disaster of some kind. The complexity that sort of builds up as the piece goes on, the complexity of decision making. Do you take a principled decision? Do you take a pragmatic decision? You know, all your advisors will tell you to take a pragmatic decision, but actually, you know in your heart of hearts you should take a principled decision. Some of the scenes I love most in it are the sort of Humphreys, you know, working their way around the notion of absolute power. You know, the king says, do it. Should they do it? Does he mean it? Does he even think he means it? What happens if they deny him? There isn't money and they know that, and so on and so on. And so I suppose, you know, the two royal brothers, you know, whose incredibly close relationship is forged by a childhood tragedy. I suppose it's obvious, given the nature of my day job, that I would inevitably, when I sat down to write, and I suppose I do this in all my writing, draw on one or many of those elements. I didn't deliberately set out to you know, where did the line, the mayor's bumbling content come from? Anyway, it's a span from somewhere. I'm very fond of it, so be careful what I say here. But yeah, there was I had a lot of fun writing it, I have to say, and obviously I did draw on a lot of things, and I suppose particularly when it comes to the decision making and the heart of power and how you deal with these things, yeah, my day job did come in handy.
Great, thank you. Next question. Right at the back there, Ruth, if you're all right, thank you.
My name's Tim Dams, I'm from Televisual Magazine. I was just struck about the comment at the beginning by Peter Fincham, I think, about giving you an awful lot of money to then burn down the set. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the process of why you actually decided to build such a big set to burn it down. I suppose the technology is there now to create CGI or effects to you know, burn cities and everything. And why you went down the craft route that you did, actually.
Are you okay to start that, maybe, Lucy, and then Gina could pick it up?
actually, I think really it's a question for Gina and John, but I think the really crucial thing about this piece was about really experiencing it with the characters, really living it and feeling like you're with them as they go through this crisis. And so really we wanted to be able to put the actors in flames, and I think that was a really big part of it. And you can't do that very well with CGI. So we were looking for veracity at every turn, and so that was why we went down that route.
Yeah, I think that's the key. That was a key decision. And when we were looking at locations and where we were going to film the streets of London, they don't exist. There's a fire. Or you go to York, and strangely, English heritage won't let us set fire to their monuments and buildings. So in many ways, when once all the scripts were in and we saw the scale of the journeys for all the different characters, the only way to film it was to build streets that we had complete control over, that we could set fire to safely, and as you saw, there are day sequences and night sequences. So once the decision was made to put our actors, and all our actors, all people here, they've all been in the fire, and once the decision was made, then we would build it. Then it just became a question of how we would do that, and then John had to sort of design the world so that he could tell the story.
Do you want to add anything to that, John?
Yeah, I actually don't think the technology does exist to put actors in that proximity of fire at a budget that any television station could actually reach for, really. Because the amount of control you would have to be able to do it with CGI would mean that you restrict your actors too much in a sort of timescale that we work in. I mean, I think going the craft route is wonderful because we have fantastic craftsmen in this country. We can build wonderful sets, and then you can just allow the actors just to be in those sets and be those characters. And I think you get a much stronger result and a much more I think immediate is a good word for it. So I think in a way it was the only way we could do it with any success.
Charles and Daniel, from an actor's perspective, would you like to add anything about being in the midst as you're...
What, my eyelashes have only just grown back. Which I'm quite relieved at.
But I didn't spend much time in the fire.
No, there was just a few sort of...
There was a great scene with the mayor where
Yeah,
it genuinely was. I was having to push the actors forward because it genuinely was.
It was very
hot.
It was very uncomfortable, and but I think that side of it just will add an air of authenticity to the whole thing. I mean, we are actually sweating for real, so no acting required, actually.
One of my favourite quotes is Richard, who plays Ashley, Lord Ashley, turned to one point and said, "Is it meant to be this hot?" The whole street was on fire. It's like, yeah, turn over.
Okay, Neil, did you have a question? Did I see your hand up there?
No, I was just really going to ask if there were any physical dangers involved with this. I think we've already answered that one. Really.
I mean, all safety requirements were
It
met,
was
weren't they?
it was a massive health and safety assessment. It was like 2 inches thick, and we had some of the big burn nights, 2 fully crewed fire engines on set. We had health and safety officers. We had a nurse with us all the time. On the big burn nights, we had 2 medics with us. And not just for the cars, because obviously the camera team, the sound team, everyone is in amongst it. We had cranes, we had all manner of things which needed extra attention and extra care. So it was challenging, and yes, there were real dangers, and it was real fire, and even though it's all controlled, the fire still behaves like real fire does. So on some of the big burns, and there's a kind of courtyard area that all goes on fire, the physics will take over, and the firestorm wind will start sucking up. And when you saw on the stunt the dresses all being blown up, that was because there was a proper updraft, and we had to be mindful of that at all times and how it does only take one spark. And a few times things were set fire to, but it was all, within.
Apart from Daniel's eyebrows specifically, okay?
Pretty much. Everyone's fine. I don't think we had any injuries. I don't think anyone's
Everyone's
suing.
fine, yeah.
No, good.
Microphone here, if that's okay. Oh, you're all right.
Nicole from Weekend. Tom, earlier you could talk about the sort of the veracity of different characters you've used and whether the actors could talk a bit about what research they did into the characters they played.
Well, let's hear from the actors on this one. I suppose one of the things that I noticed when I was watching it again is obviously, as you'd expect, how much I took, nick from fact where I possibly could, because it's easier that way. For example, with Pepys, the sort of whole rather uncomfortable situation with Mr. Bagwell and Mr. Bagwell's wife. Obviously, one of the first things I read was the Claire Tomlin biography of Pepys. And he was a fascinating historical character, and there's an awful lot there. So wherever I could, I obviously took things from real life, and I suppose watching it through, it's Francis Stewart with the King and all the rest of it. So I took as much facts as I possibly could, and then dramatised it. But maybe the actors.
I was going to say, on that basis, then, Daniel, would you like to pick up some?
Well, the fact that Pepys documented 10 years of his life is an amazing tool for me to kind of get into character, and I started to look at it and then started listening to Ken Branner's audio tape, reading it, and read the biography. But it's all there in the diary, and it was all there for me to delve into. His turbulent marriage to Elizabeth, very loving marriage but troublesome as well. His jealousies at work, all the sort of how ambitious, how much of a social climber he was. So it was just a brilliant tool to get into him and bring him to life as best I could. He's a very complex man. I think at times he's been played quite tongue-in-cheek and bawdy in the past, and yet you touched upon the Bagwell's situation. There are elements to his character which are deplorable, and he acts in an incredibly bullying way. I mean, that was a situation that he'd set up with Mr. Bagwell in order to go with his wife, which is terrible. And so hopefully we've given him a really kind of three-dimensional, rounded portrayal. I mean, it was all there in the diary.
And the same for you, was it, Perdita, when it came to researching Elizabeth?
Yes, and obviously the diaries I read as much as I could of. I mean, it's enormous, so dipping in when Elizabeth was mentioned, and from that gleaned that they had an incredibly affectionate relationship. They were married very young, for love, and kind of coming up together in the world. She shared his ambitions, absolutely, and in fact when the reason I think that the story works between the two of them is there is real love there, supposedly, and that was the case. And when she died soon, not long after the fire, he erected a very special tombstone for her. And then when he died, many years later, after having another serious relationship, he insisted on being buried with her. So there was always that, as much difficulty as they were going to go through, and childlessness, and his philandering. There was, we were able to sort of play out that the race of that.
It's all there on the screen, isn't it? Yes. And Tony, were you able to read anything about Francis Stewart? Were you able to research?
Yeah, there's also the diary where Francis is mentioned, and there was also lots of biographies by Barbara Ballard, I think, about on Francis, and there's a lot, and also it was all in the script, I think. All the characters have been written so well rounded, and they aren't used as history textbooks. They're actually multifaceted, and all these journeys interweave, and so mainly it was in the script actually.
So Charles, would you talk to us about Lord Denton now, please, the omnipotent presence that is?
Well, I'd like to ask Tom, what were your sources for this?
First time an actor's asked the writer a question on the
Well, it's interesting actually, because Lord Denton is obviously a completely fictional character, and in many ways he was the most interesting character of all to write, partly because he was completely fictional, inventing from scratch. I suppose, first of all, Charles is my all-time favourite British actor. The day he committed to it was possibly one of the more exciting I've had for a while. Not that I'm sucking up to you, Andrew, but yeah, we'll sort it out later. And one of the reasons it was really exciting was that I think I don't find villains who are one-dimensional very interesting. And what I suppose to some extent I had in my mind the whole. I mean, obviously one of the things I do in my day is from time to time you encounter the head of MI5 or head of MI6. You know, we go down and have a brief once in a while. And I always think it's a very interesting space. The idea of people who are committed, believe they're committed to the defence of our country, and some of the stuff that they have to deal with is right on the, it's very grey. If you're the head of MI6, you're dealing with foreign intelligence agencies, some of the stuff they do is not very nice. Exactly how do you interface with that when you're talking about potential terrorist acts in this country? It's all very, very grey. And I really wanted to, we used to sort of Tudor villainous intelligence chiefs who were very one-dimensional. I wanted to have a character who was multi-dimensional, who at least appears to believe that he's doing good, or does he? But something that was really complex, and I tried very hard in writing that. And one of the reasons I was really thrilled when Charles committed is I thought, now we're going to get someone who really gets that and will bring that to life. And I really think he did that brilliant. I think every time you look at Lord Denton, you could sort of look at him for a long time because you think, well, what's he really thinking, and what's his real motivation here? And that just, I thought Charles just gave the character a fantastic degree of complexity. Is that a good enough introduction for you?
I was going to say, so Charles,
Shall I go on a bit? What did you make of it when you read it?
You took the words out of my mouth. Well, I mean, I didn't have Denton's diaries or anything to look at. I had the character that Tom created, and then a lot of help from Johnny Jones, the director, and just trying to work out, how to do battle with the periwig. Well, thank you very much. Because they're monstrous things. I'm fighting this wretched thing all the time. But Tom wrote a very complex character that was as far from being two-dimensional as any creation could be. So I had a lot to play with, and it was a lot of fun a lot of the time. Although he was not a very pleasant man, but I did read stuff about that time and the Great Fire, and of course conspiracy theories abounded, and Catholics were seen in every closet as well as Reds under every bed, and paranoia was abroad, wasn't it, to a great extent. And funnily enough, not long after this, I went to Holland to do a film about a character called Michel de Ruyter, who was one of Holland's great sailors. And it was him who basically sailed up the Medway and scuttled the British fleet. It was kind of round about the same time. And I mean, everybody was at war with everybody else at that time almost, So it was, although when I initially read the script, I thought, no, I don't buy this at all. And then the more I read about it, I thought, yeah, everybody was kind of looking over their shoulder and looking for scapegoats. And the fact that the creation of a fire and a plague before, could be a dastardly Catholic plot was actually quite plausible. And the more I did it and the more time I spent on it, the more plausible it became. And so I hope in that regard I pulled it off.
very much so, thank you. Next question. Okay.
Tony Padman, freelance. Tom, could you please say, was there anything that you uncovered through your research about the Great Fire that surprised or amazed you?
Wow, that's a difficult question. Good answer about 9 o'clock tonight. I mean, yeah, I suppose in a way, one of the things that interested me a lot was, as Charles was just saying, was the level of sort of paranoid conspiracy. How many of your friends do you you know what they're, if they're either Protestant or Catholic? Do you even know? I probably don't. Perhaps in some cases I do. So just the sheer level of that basic division in society and the utter paranoia about it was kind of fascinating. And of course it does have contemporary resonances to some degree. In every society, every time, to some, one might say we're very ready to look for scapegoats and to be frightened of something under the bed, whatever it is, and you might say we live through similar things today. But of course it is such an enormous part of our history, the Protestant and Catholic division. It runs through so many centuries, and although I'm a history student and I've spent a lot of time studying it, just to go back and be reminded of that epic division in society, it was a bit of a surprise to me. Just how much it permeated an event that apparently had nothing to do with it. The Great Fire London, what the hell that got to do with Catholics and Protestants? But actually, the fact that in people's psychology it was so significant. I'll probably think of 10 other things, so I'm not giving you a very good answer, but I'll ponder later. The other thing I just wanted to mention at the end of Charles's answer there is I think our most significant achievement in this is to make a lot of very good-looking actors actually look good in wigs. That was one of ITV's big concerns. All the good-looking people, how are we going to make them look good in wigs? And I thought it was a good achievement.
I've got something that I thought was really interesting when we were developing this show. It was one of the key reasons for doing it, because the thing about the Great Fire is everyone knows it took place and they know it was in 1666, but actually they don't know very much beyond that. And when we first started thinking about this, my first port of call was Wikipedia, as ever, and I was astonished to discover that they lynched people on the streets, that people turned against their neighbours, and there were genuine lynch mobs rampaging around London. Now, I'm sure I wasn't taught that at school. And I found that really shocking. And when Tom and I were talking about this initially, one of the things that we were really interested about was, and something that he really brought to bear on it and talked about a lot, was about how outwardly very sort of civilised societies can implode very, very quickly. And when we started developing this a few years ago now, it was very shortly after the London riots had taken place, and I think Tom drew quite a lot of inspiration from that, didn't we? I thought we talked about it a lot, and it was a really interesting comparison that we kept on coming back to.
Yeah, I think one of the things obviously about my, I've been 25 years as whatever you call it, frontline journalist for ITV, and one of the things that keeps me in that job and keeps me going on in that job is a sort of fascination of how human beings behave under stress. It's a war, it's a riot, it's an earthquake in which many people lost their homes, and you see a lot of that on the screen there. And it's just always fascinated me how people do behave, under stress. And sometimes I'm always looking for logic behind it, and sometimes there's no rhyme or reason. Some people behave well, some people behave very badly. And Lucy and I did talk a lot about the London riots. Why did people suddenly start looting Foot Locker? Because they could. I still don't really, do lots of research into it and all the rest of it. I still don't necessarily have a clear answer. Even if I'm a journalist for another 25 years, I don't think I'll necessarily have a clear answer to that, because it's in the inherent nature of humanity. But certainly, as we talked about a lot, and I found it fascinating. And Lucy's certainly right. The lynchings were kind of really shocking. Like, lynching people, that's an enormous thing to do. So yeah, that was a key part of our kind of thematic discussions when we were talking about how to get this going.
So we need to take the last question then. Tim, you're right to project from there.
Thank you. I just wondered if this is a success, which I'm sure it will be, is there another historical event you'd like to give this kind of fast-moving news treatment drama to, one that we haven't perhaps given as much attention to in the past on TV? As a question for everybody, but Tom.
I think. Well, what I would say is that, as I said at the start, I'm a sort of history student. I wasn't a very good academic history student, because I always, as I was studying the Russian Revolution or the French Revolution, where it was, I always found myself thinking, wow, wouldn't it have been amazing to be there? I don't really care about, some of the academic arguments, but just how amazing would it have been to be, standing outside the Winter Palace or whatever. So I'm very clear in my mind that the purpose of historical fiction is not to reflect fact 100%. It can't, that's obvious. It's to inspire people to go and find out the facts for themselves. That's how it worked for me as a child. And read something, and then I would go out and find the facts for myself and get really interested. I really hope this will do this about the Great Fire. I hope it will really interest people in the period more broadly. The Restoration. We were a republic, but it's probably now the monarchy, one of the few public institutions that remains relatively unstable these days. We were a republic for a while, and it just sort of petered out into nothing out of kind of listlessness and boredom and inability to agree who should succeed Cromwell. So I think historical fiction like this has a fantastic role to play in inspiring people to go and find out about an event, but a whole period. And there are, I'm fascinated in the English Civil War. There are many periods that I think could be brought to life in this way, but I think its main purpose, in my mind, is to interest people in our past. I don't know, everyone else will have their own views on what else could be done or what else interests them.
I've been racking my head for 3 years for another idea like this, and I haven't yet come up with it, but...
It's Lucy's idea, and it's a brilliant one, so we'll wait for her to have another good one.
Sorry, could I just ask, how do you avert the fire? How was the fire averted? Was it done?
How did it go? How did it finish?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we follow it through in episode 4. You see that they did actually take gunpowder from the tower and make the fire breaks that the king ordered, and the wind dropped and it rained. So it's a kind of combination of naturally subsided, but they did put fire breaks in just before it reached the tower and stopped it.
Does anyone else have periods they want? Any good ideas?
Something with water, I think. No.
If anybody hasn't got any further burning questions, sorry. Just leave you with one thought. Apparently this fire started 348 years ago yesterday, so we rather feel it's quite timely to be doing the press release today. So thank you very much for coming today, and I know quite a few